On to the next section. Office 365 exclusions with forced tunneling. Now, this was a very interesting Microsoft post that they released at the beginning of COVID, wasn't it?
No question. So a bit of background on this. So when you set up a VPN connection, not just an always-on VPN connection, but any VPN connection, you have the choice of enabling split tunneling or forced tunneling. So split tunneling is very simply, we're going to send traffic over the VPN selectively, right? So we define specific routes to go over the VPN tunnel. Everything goes out. Everything else that's not explicitly defined in the routing table goes out directly to the internet. And so very commonly with split tunneling, we say, here's what our internal private networks are, and we add those to the routing table, and then everything else that is not in that routing table goes to the internet. So your file servers, domain controllers, SQL servers, SharePoint, anything on premises that's in your private network would be in those private address spaces that you route over the tunnel. Everything else that's on the internet with public IP addresses would go out the internet. And that's the generally accepted best practice for VPN today. Historically, it wasn't. In the early days of VPN, it was common to do something called forced tunneling, which meant when the VPN was connected, bring all the traffic over the tunnel, even the internet traffic. There were some compelling reasons to do that in the 90s. Today, perhaps not. I don't know, Leo, if I have an article about split and forced tunneling that I wrote because I answer this question so often. So I wrote that because it was just easier to refer to a blog post about that. But there are compelling reasons for both. At the end of the day, we recommend split tunneling, but understand that this is a design decision that administrators have to make. So when the real challenge with forced tunneling is that it is heavy-handed. It does bring all internet traffic over the tunnel. And again, maybe in the 80s and 90s that was acceptable, but today we have so many applications and services running in the cloud that are publicly available that forced tunneling it is challenging, because now it's just a lot of traffic. It's not just some light internet traffic to a website for some news or webmail or something. There's a lot of data flowing over that, and so it became really problematic. It's forced tunneling introduces basically it's a suboptimal routing path. You have a lot of protocol overhead and encryption overhead. All of those kind of conspire to make a rather poor experience for the user. So Microsoft introduced this concept of exclusion routes. So in other words, this is like previously we talked about selective tunneling, where we wanted to route some internet sites over the tunnel. This is the reverse. So in a forced tunnel scenario, I have some sites that I don't want to force tunnel. And so you basically create a route, and in that route, you define it as an exclusion route, and it will be excluded. So essentially, if you're trying to get to that property, everything's going over the tunnel, but if you match that route, it will be exempted from the VPN. It will go directly to the internet. And in this scenario, Microsoft realized that shortly after the COVID hit, that many of their customers were complaining about poor performance to Office 365, and so they came up with this technology. They pushed that out, and then they published a list of IP addresses for Office 365. And as you can imagine, there's a great many of them. And by the way, they change all the time. So you can query these. Then Microsoft puts them on the internet. There's a web page. You can see them. You can actually do it programmatically because you can pull this down with JSON and so forth. The challenge, of course, is that if you're doing this in Intune first in Intune, there is no support for exclusion routes, so you have to do this with XML. And if you're doing this with an XML, you have to populate those routes. And of course, when they change, you now have to go back out and touch the client configuration. So once again, Leo and his team have made this greatly simplified. So Leo, if you could explain your solution for that.
Yeah, so just showing on the screen here, this is the Microsoft published script for going through and amending all of the Office 365 routes into your tunnel.
It's just a quick script, huh?
Yeah, not a particularly pleasant one in any stretch of the imagination. So what we did was we effectively do something very similar to the way the script works, but we've embedded it again in that client configuration. This is one of the very few times the DPC agent actually needs to have outbound connectivity to the internet, and specifically to the Microsoft URL endpoint. And so to enable this, we just go in, we tick that box, and we hit OK. And that's all you need to worry about from a configuration side, apart from that client connectivity perspective, because the just with the DNS resolution. Again, it's each of the clients will be going out talking to the Office 365 endpoint, downloading that list of currently published IP addresses, and then amending all of those into the exclusion route table. So this is only valid as part of a forced tunnel scenario. If you try and set it while you're in a split tunnel, I believe it just ignores it and it gives you a warning saying this is an invalid configuration, but just carries on as normal. Mainly because if you're already doing a defined split tunnel, then there's no point in having the forced or the exclusions in there, because they shouldn't be overlapping it anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
And again, the other thing to note is that the exclusion list for Microsoft is very large, very broad, and does not completely interface well with AOVPN. So you'll see here, for example, again, we've got like outlook.office.365.com. Because that doesn't interface with the root table directly, those elements get ignored. So it is only the IP CIDRs that get included in that list at the moment. So it is not perfect, but it is a lot easier than doing it through the Microsoft perspective, and you likely get a much better performance than if you just didn't exclude them at all.
I 100% agree. Absolutely.
So the other thing I did want to mention at this point is that we've had this question come up from a couple of customers of, oh, can you do a similar thing for, say, Zoom, or for I can't remember the other ones, but yeah, or like basically I've got this giant list of exclusions that I really want to add into my into my DPC configuration. But that could potentially update or something, or I just don't want to go through and type in 200 CIDRs manually. And for that, I hear you.
Yeah.
I've done 10 or 20 before, and it's just pretty miserable. It's again doable, and but especially if you need to like do that update. But what we don't want to do at kind of Power On is be the bottleneck on that stuff. And also, every time we add a feature in like this, there's a lot of ongoing maintenance to keep it up to date, potentially, as the APIs that these various companies use could potentially change, and then we need to kind of re-interface with those. So what we've done is we've actually created a more generic solution, which is available from, or it's effectively a script that you can kind of customize yourselves, which is available. The link for that should be being published now. But it's available through our support website, and effectively we're making use of the fact that the configuration is done via group policy. There we are. Sorry, I thought I was logging out there for a second, but it looks like just my Azure Virtual Desktop session. But yeah, effectively what this is doing is we've got a PowerShell script that just looks for a file that has a list of IP addresses or CIDRs in it, and that can be either on a file share, on a website, wherever you want to kind of update this script to go to, you can do it. And we're using the Zoom ones as an example of this. And then what it's doing is it's using the group policy PowerShell commandlets to go in and interface with that group policy to set to automatically bring all of those in as well. So it's a more generic approach that should hopefully suit a lot of customers' needs where it's not the Office 365 routes that they want to exclude in this way.
Outstanding. Excellent.